Here's a question for you, Pat, really for the audience, for anybody. Did the CIA get it wrong on Iraq and weapons of mass destruction? But more importantly, why does it matter today? Well, it matters today because, as mentioned last week, and at this point I'm hearing it so much that we really have to go over it in more detail, Donald Trump and many of his supporters have been dismissing the CIA report about Russian hacking and the interference in the American election to help Donald Trump by saying, wait a second, David, you're trusting the CIA? This is the same CIA that got it way wrong on Iraq and weapons of mass destruction. And the Trumpists have loved this. After Trump said it in response to the Russian hacking news, you saw it parroted all over the internet in all of those Trumpist recesses of the internet. Unfortunately, it doesn't stand up to even the most minor scrutiny. It is not what the CIA ever said. It is a totally false and incorrect narrative. There was a document from the intelligence community, a 93-page document used to justify the invasion of Iraq by the Bush administration. Now, every time I do this, I have to speak almost like I'm talking to a fourth grader, which is the way Donald Trump normally speaks in order to not be misunderstood. The Bush administration said that this document confirmed with no uncertainty that Iraq was actively pursuing nuclear weapons, that they were concealing chemical weapons, they were concealing biological weapons, that they were an immediate threat to American national security. That's what the Bush administration said, the CIA document said. However, last year, we were finally able to see how definitive that document was in its assertions, and it became very clear that the Bush administration made a lot of it up. To call it an exaggeration would be a major understatement. This is a report issued by the government, funded by the think tank Rand Corporation, and it is called Blinders, Blunders, and Wars. And it said that the NIE, quote, contained several qualifiers that were dropped. As the draft went up the intelligence chain of command, the conclusions were treated increasingly definitively. So the document the CIA released was very carefully worded. It was very conservative. And here's one example of how the Bush administration basically bastardized this. The actual intelligence from the CIA said, for example, the intelligence community concluded that Iraq, quote, probably has renovated a vaccine production plant to manufacture biological weapons, but we are unable to determine whether biological weapons agent research has resumed. How does that get translated into pro-war propaganda? Well, then President George W. Bush shows up in Cincinnati, Ohio on October 7th of 2002, and he says, quote, Iraq possesses and produces chemical and biological weapons, and the evidence indicates that Iraq is reconstituting its nuclear weapons program. Document never said that. People are blaming the CIA and the document. You should be blaming Bush and Cheney and Condi Rice and Colin Powell, who misstated the intelligence to make the case for war.
Yeah, it's clear that they dropped the qualifiers there in order to cherry pick the information that they wanted to sell us a war in Iraq.
Yep.
And unfortunately, a lot of the American people and a lot of people in Congress just didn't do their homework and went along with it.
In September of 2002, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld said the U.S. had a, quote, bulletproof evidence linking Saddam Hussein's regime to the terrorist group. Quote, we do have solid evidence of the presence in Iraq of al-Qaeda members, including some that have been in Baghdad. That's not what the intelligence report said. The report said that its information about a working relationship between al-Qaeda and Iraq was based on, quote, sources of varying reliability like Iraqi defectors, and it is not clear at all that Saddam Hussein was even aware of this supposed relationship. There is no way that you could read the intelligence report and say it was the CIA who got it wrong. And now the problem is that Trumpists write it all off because the CIA, quote, got it wrong then, so clearly they got it wrong about Russian hacking. The CIA never got it wrong about the Iraq War.
Yeah, I'd have to say the analogy just does not stand up.
If you want to make an analogy, and this is not an analogy that the Trumpists are going to like, the real analogy to make is we should be skeptical that the Trump team is correct because the Bush team, the Bush administration, ignored data and misused other data. So if the CIA, Iraq, Bush administration debacle teaches us anything, it's we should have been skeptical of what Bush was telling us in 2002 and 2003, and we should be skeptical of what Trump is telling us now, because in the same way that Bush wanted to misstate intelligence in order to further his political goals, Donald Trump has a huge vested interest in misstating what it is that we can and cannot believe from the CIA and the FBI, because it undermines the credibility of his administration.